This is a story that happened back in 2014, and it still sends chills down the spines of those who were there to witness it. I'm about to tell you what happened to my cousin and his friend, Jason, one summer night while hiking near Mount Hood in Oregon. They didn't believe in the paranormal, not then at least. But that night changed everything. It was a cool August evening, and Jason had invited my cousin Mark to join him for an overnight hike. They'd been planning this for weeks, excited to camp out near the Lost Lake trailhead. The day had gone well. Sunset on the mountains was breathtaking, and the sky had turned a deep, cloudless indigo as they set up camp just off the main trail. Everything seemed peaceful. They cooked dinner, shared some laughs, and by around 10 p.m. they both slipped into their sleeping bags, ready to get some rest. The plan was to wake up early and finish the hike the next day. Simple enough, right? But what happened next would be far from simple. Around midnight, Mark woke up to the sound of a phone ringing. He thought he was dreaming at first. Who gets a call in the middle of the woods? But the ringing was real, cutting through the stillness of the forest. His phone was off, and Jason's phone had no signal. Jason woke up too, groggy and confused. He muttered something about hearing it too. The sound was unmistakable, an old-fashioned rotary phone ring, not a modern cell phone ringtone, and it was coming from somewhere deep in the woods. They both sat up, wide awake now, adrenaline kicking in. Jason, being the braver of the two, grabbed his flashlight and insisted they check it out. Mark wasn't so sure. Something about the situation felt off, like they weren't supposed to follow that sound. But curiosity, and maybe a little pride, got the best of them. They set off, following the direction of the ringing. It was faint but constant, echoing through the trees. The deeper they went, the more disoriented they became. The trail had long disappeared beneath them, replaced by dense underbrush. Mark started getting uneasy, his instincts screaming that they should turn back. But Jason kept going, flashlight flicking from tree to tree. After what felt like an eternity, they stumbled into a clearing. And there it was, a small, dilapidated cabin. The windows were shattered, the door barely hanging on its hinges, but the sound of the phone was louder than ever, like it was coming from inside. Jason, always the adventurer, walked up to the cabin without a second thought. "Wait here," he said. He gave Mark a grin, the kind that said, "This is going to be a great story later." Mark stayed back, nervous but unable to leave his friend behind. Jason stepped onto the creaky porch and pushed the door open. The phone was still ringing, echoing through the dark interior of the cabin. And then, just as Jason disappeared inside, the ringing stopped. The silence was deafening. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears as he called out, "Jason, what do you see in there?" No answer. A minute passed, then two. Suddenly there was a loud crash from inside the cabin. Something had fallen, maybe furniture being knocked over. Jason's voice echoed out, but it wasn't his normal, cocky tone. He was screaming, panicked. "Help me! Mark, help!" Mark's heart nearly stopped. He bolted toward the cabin but stopped dead in his tracks when he heard something behind him. Footsteps, soft but unmistakable, moving through the brush. He turned, shining his flashlight around wildly. Nothing. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled him, faster and faster, as if something was watching him from the shadows, unseen but definitely there. Mark's hands were trembling as he turned back to the cabin. He had no choice. Jason was still inside, screaming for help. Mark ran to the porch, about to burst through the door, when it swung open on its own. Jason came staggering out, eyes wide, pale as a ghost. His breath was shallow, like he'd just sprinted for his life. His shirt was torn, dirt streaked across his face, but there were no obvious injuries. Mark rushed to him, but Jason was shaking his head, muttering something Mark couldn't quite hear at first. "No one's there." "No one was there," Jason whispered, eyes unfocused. Mark grabbed him by the shoulders, trying to get him to talk. "What happened? Who was in there?" Mark demanded. Jason just shook his head again, his voice barely audible. "I heard them, but there was no one. I saw something. It wasn't human, Mark, it wasn't human." They didn't stick around to find out more. With a sense of terror neither had ever felt before, They ran. Mark didn't look back, and Jason barely said another word the entire night. They somehow found their way back to their camp, grabbed their gear in silence, and made the decision to hike back to the car in the dark. When they finally reached the safety of the trailhead, the first hints of daylight were creeping over the horizon. But the strangest part of this story didn't end there. A week later, Mark heard something on the local news that made his blood run cold. A hiker had gone missing near the Lost Lake trailhead. Authorities had searched the area but found nothing, except for one thing. They discovered an old cabin miles off the trail in the middle of nowhere. And inside the cabin, a rotary phone, off the hook. The case of the missing hiker remains unsolved to this day. And every now and then, locals claim to hear a phone ringing in the woods. Some say it's the missing hiker trying to make contact. Others think it's something far darker, something waiting to lure you in. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, this story draws inspiration from a true unsolved case near Mount Hood. Garen Kirk, a 31-year-old experienced hiker who disappeared in Mount Hood National Forest, has captured public attention since 2014. Kirk went missing during a solo trip in December 2014, and despite a large search effort, no trace of him was found until 2018. That year, hikers discovered a wallet and human remains in a ravine near Frog Lake, which were confirmed to be Kirk's in 2022 through DNA testing. The circumstances surrounding his death remain mysterious and unsolved.